Hello, this is Minder Chen. I'm Professor of Management Information System at Smith School of Business and Economics, CSU Channel Island. In this lecture, we're going to discuss goal setting. Setting goal is part of the planning management function within the PLLC framework. And we're going to discuss what goal setting is all about and how it may be related to vision, mission, and business strategy. Our learning goals for this unit is to demonstrate an understanding for you to demonstrate after the course, an understanding of the nature of goals and objective, and why it is important for the effective management. And also, you'll be able to explain what may be considered as good goals, which means how you can define goals that make sense. And we're also going to learn how an approach, which is Balanced Scorecard, BSC, which allowed us to link vision and mission to strategy and goals. We also need to learn the role of goal setting in employee performance review. Please be aware, in our textbook, it consider goal as being high level and objective being more specific. So there's a little bit like hierarchy. Goals tends to be more abstract and objective tends to be much more concrete. However, in this lecture, we're going to just use goals for both goals and objective, and because people actually use these two terms sometimes in the opposite meaning, therefore we're going to just use goal in general. So what's the goals of goal setting? And when you define goals, it will help you to implement your strategy, because all your goals need to be consistent with your strategy. Goals cover your strategy, so if you achieve all your goals, your strategy will be considered successfully implemented. So if we come from the top, vision, missions, value shape your strategy, and strategy shape our goals. However, we're going to discuss goal setting first, and then we're going to discuss strategy in another lecture that follows. When we talk about goal, we actually need to discuss measure or measurements, because in management, if you cannot measure something, then that something just doesn't exist, which means it cannot be managed. However, we need to measure what's important in terms of goals, objective, or sometimes people may use the term called key performance indicator, so-called KPI. It's a very common term. If someone say, "Oh, I haven't meet my KPI in my firm," they're referring to the key performance indicator, which is another term for goals. And all those goals or KPI need to be published as a metrics or benchmark people would be measured against. And we need to reward people when they meet or exceed the goal that has been set for them. We will also use performance measures. When we say measure, we're measuring people's performance against a predefined goal. And so performance measure is to improve. Once we measure people's performance against a goal, we can use that information as a feedback to help us to improve the business process, or even revise business strategy, or redesign the work system, the job, which need to be performed by people, to see whether they need better support, better training, or how the process can be improved. More on measurement. There's a saying, say, what gets measured gets managed. McKinsey, which is a consulting firm, has a popular saying, so what you can measure, you can manage, which is very similar to what I have. However, Einstein was quoted saying that not everything that counts can be measured, and not everything that can be measured counts, which means sometimes we tend to measure something that are more visible, measurable, but we've for some reason unintentionally may ignore something that's less tangible, difficult to measure. However, they may be more important than what we try to measure. A quality guru, Edward Deming, Deming is considered the father of quality control movement, stated that management by use only of visible figures, visible number or measurements, with a little consideration of the figures that are unknowable, is actually on his list of 7 deadly management diseases. It's the number 5 on his list. This is very similar to what Einstein was saying, and basically when we try to measure something, we need to pay extra attention to something that's less visible or difficult to measure. But I do believe if something, even it's intangible, difficult to measure, we can still come up with some mechanism to measure it to a certain degree. If you can measure it, you can manage it. However, I argue you need to be careful what you measure, because you may most likely get the measurement or performance you wanted. However, there will be some, if you're not careful, there will be some undesirable consequence. Because when people try to meet the target, because the target, the goal, may be tied with some reward system, they may manipulate the number, do certain things just to meet the goal, however, create some really horrible side effects, which may ruin actually the organization. And in Peter Drucker's book called Management, Tasks, Responsibility, and Practices, he stated that work implies not only somebody supposed to do the job, but also the accountability, a deadline, and finally the measurement of the result. So measurement is very important. We're measuring the result of somebody's work, and which will provide us a feedback. The result will be treated as a feedback on the work itself, and also the planning process. And sometimes we may not plan well, so we may set unrealistic goals. Or sometimes the work, the person certainly performed the job, may be the one who need to improve, but sometimes it's the system behind it. So challenges for measurement are the following. The measurement may not be relevant. Because a lot of time organization tends to emphasize historical financial data, financial goal objective, which may no longer be relevant because accounting data tends to be historical data. Also, measurement tends to be out of alignment. They're out of alignment with strategy and with our vision and mission. And the measurement may be short-sighted. Once again, the financial outcomes are often short-term in nature, and therefore, if you rely too much on financial data, you may not pay enough attention in your measurement to long-term viability of the organization. So what constitute so-called good goals? And there's a very well-known SMART principle. SMART is actually an acronym for the following 5 principles which make effective goals. One is specific, which means who is doing what, where should be done, and how much should be done. That will help us to focus our attention. Measurable, something which can be quantified so we can track its progress. Aggressive, or some people use attainable for A in SMART. Something that's difficult to achieve. They're not the same. Aggressive, which means when we set the goal, we try to be a little more aggressive. But you don't want to be too aggressive. That's impossible to achieve. It's not attainable. Then people would actually, instead of being inspired by that stretch or aggressive goal, they become really frustrated and simply give up from the outset. So we need to try to find the balance. If something just easily achievable, then that goal is probably set too low. So aggressive goal may increase effort level by the employee and potentially may pay off. R stands for realistic, and some people believe R stands for relevant. And realistic means something that you can and want to achieve. And relevant certainly means relevant to your strategy, relevant to your mission and missions. So realistic is more related to maybe yourself, and relevant maybe more to the organization. So relevant, probably I will prefer to use relevant to also means avoid effort that's useless. If it's not relevant, it's useless. Then that's a waste. T, the last part of the principle, which is the T in SMART, is time bound, which means that you need to actually have a timeline or deadline in the goal that you specify, which will create an urgency for people to work on achieving the goal. There's thousands of research studies showing that you can get more done with SMART goals than without them. So this is a very useful management principle in terms of goal setting. SMART principle. Do remember what each letters in SMART stands for, and why it is considered a good measurement for effective goals. Let's zoom in a little bit on the S in the SMART, specific. Specific goal will usually answer the 5W question. It's like what do I want to accomplish? Why? What's the reason, purpose, or benefit for accomplishing the goal? And which this may actually tie back to strategy and tie back to your mission and vision. Who should be involved, and where this should be done, and which identify maybe the requirement and constraint in terms of reaching the goal. And here I listed, other than what, why, who, where, which, I'm listing when. When is not related to you can say it's part of specific, but we do have in the SMART principle time bound. So when is really related to the time bound. However, we can also argue you want to be very specific, not just about what, why, who, where, which, but also you want to specify the time. And that also makes sense. Okay, we want to develop goals and objectives that inspire, challenge, and stretch people's capability, and this is important. So goal setting is really an art. If you set it too low, then you're not inspiring people. If you set it too high, it's impossible to reach. People get frustrated. So somewhere in the middle, which just to some extent a little bit stretch goal that's actually beyond most of people believe what they can do, but they do have the potential to reach those stretch goals. That would be the best situation that you may have. We mentioned relevant as one of the SMART principle, and this brings us to this slide, which help us to discuss two popular terms in management, which is efficiency and effectiveness. Effectiveness is doing the right things, and efficiency is doing things right. So you may be doing the things right, but you may be doing the wrong things. Then you're purely just efficient, but probably not effective at all. What you're doing may not be relevant. So effectiveness is somewhat related to relevant in that SMART principle. If we look at a systems viewpoint, we have resources that feed into a process as an input, and which will produce the outcome, and you can convert the resource into the output very efficient, which can be measured by the per unit of resources or input, that the outcome that you generated by per unit of resources. And however, if the output is not aligned or relevant to the goals that you have set, then the whole process or task is not considered effective at all. So you need to measure the gap between the output and against the goal to get a sense of the effectiveness of the activity here. So make sure you can define what is effectiveness, what is efficiency, and what's the difference between the two. So definitely doing the right thing is the first, and then try to do that right things right, as efficient as possible, and after you have defined the goal properly. Here's an example of actually a very concrete example of goals, and in terms of, let's look at the first one: increase the number of new paying customer by 50%. So there's a specific number, okay? And measure means how to do it. Try to convert a new contract within 2 months. New contract and become which become paying customer. The target, there's a number, specific measurement. Here we also added frequency. How frequently you're going to measure the goal, okay? Which we did not mention anything related to how frequently we should measure certain goal against the performance against the goal, but here frequency has been defined. And where are you going to get that data, which is the source of the data for the measurement, which most likely come from your information system. And also year to date really means that so far what's your achievement, what's your performance in terms of reaching the goal. In this case, we have only reached 20% of the 20% instead of 50%. So we're still behind, but depends on what's the deadline. Okay, if you have this, if it's an annual goal, then this is only the very beginning of the year, then this can be considered pretty good situation. So you need to measure this year to date against how far along in that year that you take the measure. I will create an assignment to ask you to practice how you would write smart goals. And first of all, a SMART goal usually comes with the following sentence formula, which means you have an action verb plus specific measurable result plus target date. This is the time bound, right? And this is as SMART and measurable. Okay, at least we cover like 3 letters in the SMART principle. For instance, for Ferrari as a company, they may state something like to increase, which is an action verb, sales by 60%. It's measurable, very specific result by year end 2018. That's a target date. So I will give you some goals below, and then as assignment, I may modify this a little bit and ask you to maybe pick 2 or 3 goals to revise it such that they conform to this formula for SMART goal. Next, the last topic we're going to discuss in this lecture is called MBO, Management by Objective, which was popular for quite a while. It came from Peter Drucker. Once again, Drucker's book called The Practice of Management. And the whole objective of management by objective is an approach that aims to increase organizational performance by aligning. Alignment is the key word. Aligning the subordinates' objective throughout the organization with the overall goal, which is a higher level goal set by management. So it's kind of a trickle-down process. Like we set very high-level goal at the corporate level, and then we start to trickle that goal down to the individual level. The principle behind the MBO, management by objective, is to ensure people know what the organization is trying to achieve and what their role, those individuals' role and responsibility should be in accomplish this goal. And when we discuss a goal, we certainly want to know who is responsible for what. Just like in the previous slide, Drucker certainly tried to emphasize in MBO that individual people's role and responsibility against the objective or goals, and or business function for that matter. There's a popular metrics people use called responsibility assignment metrics. And so here it could be, in this case, we're using tasks. However, it could be goals. Then we can list organization unit or individual. Over here, and the intersection between, let's say, the goal or the task and an individual would be what's the role or responsibility they may have. The RACI stands for responsible, A stands for accountable, C stands for consulted, I stands for informs. For instance, you may be responsible, you're responsible for procurement, and you're accountable for planning and scheduling. Accountable really means you may not be the one doing the planning and scheduling, but somehow if somebody who did that screw up, you will be held accountable for the failure. Okay, so you may be the manager of that person doing the planning and scheduling, so you are ultimately responsible for that. Consulted, which means maybe you have some expertise or information, so people need to consult you when they engage in, maybe, say, in this case, quality management. I stands for informed, which means people, somewhat their work is related to this goals or task, and you will keep them informed about the progress. For quality movement, they have another letter Q for quality reviewer. In this case, for RCI, we don't usually include quality reviewer as a role. So let's look at MBO in terms of the process and procedure. The goal of MBO is align individual employees' goal with organizational goal. And also MBO focus on outcome, which is the goal. Remember that system diagram showing goal is the align with the output. So focus on output instead of the processes. And the question is why that's the case. Okay, and personally, probably because of my training, sometimes I actually think that understand the processes is as important as defining proper outcomes. The step in implementing MBO is to set high-level organizational goal and then trickle it down to department level goals based on the organizational goal, and then eventually trickle down further to set individual goal collaboratively with the employee, so that they participate in that goal setting process. It's not that some manager set the goal up and then just give it to the subordinate to follow. So it's a very collaborative process. And eventually, jointly, we will develop an action plan in implementing or achieving these goals. Last, not the least, we need to periodically review progress and revise the goals or the systems and the assignments of responsibility and resource ability, etc. In this final review process. Okay, that's it. This concludes our first lecture on goal setting. We will come back and discuss balanced scorecard.